These unassuming headphones aren't shy about making a statement, and it might not be what you expect. Hey folks, Norb here. So these are the Meze Liric, and they sell for about $2,000 as of this recording. You can find them on Meze's site, which I've linked in the description. If I had to boil down my feelings to a word, it would be interesting, both from the way Meze designed the user experience to the way they tuned them. To test these out, I used them pretty much exclusively as my work headphones for 6 weeks. The leather pads are soft but supportive, the clamping force is sufficient without being too much, and the headband is wide and padded, making them pretty comfortable for long-term use. The sound isolation is excellent, by the way. As for size, these tended to run comfortably large on me. If you're smaller, these may run too large. That said, I did have a small issue with the sliders. If I was wearing them for too long, sometimes the sliders would slip out a little bit and I'd have to readjust the headphones. It wasn't a very big issue, it wasn't terrible, but it does raise one concern. With these, positioning and angling of the speakers impacts more than just the comfort. That alignment either doesn't happen or doesn't stick, which potentially changes the way the listener perceives the sound. The rest of the design and build is overall excellent. They're metal and leather throughout, and they have this really nice texture at the back that feels just fantastic to the touch. When it comes to looks, these are understated in a way that tells me that they'll stand the test of time, which makes them good for wearing them out of the house. Like with every Meze headphone I've used, the design elements are well thought out and, to put it bluntly, beautiful. These come with two 3.5mm audio cables, a 4-foot cable and a 10-foot cable, but because of the angling of the ports, you may be limited as to what cables you can use. So for best compatibility, stick with Meze's own cables. They also come with a lovely, very well designed case that includes not just a bag for the cable, but also a strap to hold the bag down. Cases are a part of the experience, and if there's one thing that Meze does well, it's the overall experience. Speaking of experience, the Liric weighs 393 grams or 13.4 ounces. These are Isodynamic driver headphones, which tend to be much heavier than average, so they're on the lighter side for Isodynamic driver headphones. I have some neck issues, but these were still light enough for me to wear all day. By the way, I keep saying Isodynamic. You may be more familiar with the term planar magnetic. Basically, it's a driver technology that's used for the driver instead of a dynamic driver. That's where we start getting into the more polarizing part of this review. In part because this is where I ask you to go ahead and click like if you've been enjoying this and finding this useful, and if you want more content like this, you should click subscribe. Let me get this out of the way. These are very easy to drive, so you can use your phone or your laptop without an issue. But if you have a dedicated amp or a DAC, these improve significantly, especially in the bass. That's common, by the way, with planar magnetics or isodynamic headphones. Usually a little bit extra power brings up more bass, especially in those technologies. They also have a very unique tuning that emphasizes that bass, which is why I think these make a statement. It's a very specific vision of enjoyment, and I think that many people will either love it or hate it. I haven't met very many people who are ambivalent about it. The frequency response on these is interesting. Starting with the bass, the Liric give a bit of an extra boost in the upper bass region, up to about 200 Hertz, which is rich and full without being overpowering. It also is never muddy, it's perfectly clear. There's not much in the way of physicality by default, but it's definitely present. That said, you can get some insanely great bass physicality with these with just a little bit of EQ and a halfway decent amp. What made me realize this was listening to Time Lapse by Ludovico Einaudi. Now, this piece was fantastic on these in large part because of that bass. It just rumbled well. It was tight, it was clean, and it was powerful. In fact, instrumental tracks that focus mostly on low-end bass and percussion were just fantastic with these. I used to play double bass. I'm talking about classical here more so than jazz, and I just completely fell in love with it again. In fact, I'll drop some links in the description to a couple of pieces on YouTube that I really enjoyed listening to with these. As for the mids, there are two stories here. The first one is the lower mids, and those were pulled down a bit. In fact, anything below about 800 Hertz feels a little weak, for a lack of a better term. It's still there, it still sounds great, but it is weak compared to everything around it. One of my test pieces is T.S. Monk by Al Foster, and this was especially evident here. There just isn't a lot of presence in that area. Not just that, but I feel that this caused the Liric to have somewhat recessed vocals, because this is where most of the human voices hang out anyway, below 800 Hertz. The upper mids, on the other hand, have a lot of strength and clarity to them because they're emphasized, especially between 1 and 1.5 kilohertz. After that point though, they do pull back some, and this is where I thought that these could sound a little bit deficient if you're expecting these to be super exciting, which is what a bass boost would usually indicate, especially with a dip in the mids. As strange as this might seem, I think what they were going for with this frequency response is more of a relaxing sound, while still being clear and responsive and fun. They're definitely trying to make these sound more open than standard closed back headphones without giving up the intimacy that makes closed back headphones special. Not just that, but sometimes when companies try to make a warmer and more relaxing sound, they end up almost covering some of the details or focusing so much on the mids that they forget the extremes of the sound. The Lyric don't do that, and this is something that you either like because you like the quick response in isodynamic headphones, or you don't because it ends up sounding a bit metallic and unnatural to you. Back to the frequency response though, I feel that the treble region was definitely more relaxed until you get to about 7 kilohertz, which is again pretty high, at which point you get some additional emphasis. This helps create some separation and clarity, but unfortunately this push also makes for somewhat metallic sounding highs and really impacted the timbre for me. Here's how. The timbre of an instrument is determined by what tones are emphasized through its harmonic sequence when a note is played. To put it very simply, when an instrument plays a note, you're not just hearing that one tone. One tone alone is called a sine wave. What you're actually hearing is a bunch of other notes above that first note. Why that happens gets into physics that I won't get into here, but we call these overtones or harmonics. Sometimes you hear more of some tones than others because of relative intensities, and that happens because of things like what the instrument is made out of, for example, which affects the vibration of specific frequencies, and the shape of the instrument itself, which impacts that further. That creates what's called timbre. To create timbre, you need higher notes. When you attenuate those frequencies, when you pull them back some, like what happens in the Lyric between 1.5 and 5 kilohertz, you change the timbre and sometimes reduce realism. Not in response, but in the presentation, and that's what I experienced here in some cases. On top of that, the slight boost above 7 kilohertz then emphasizes some of those other overtones, which again impacts timbre. The reason the frequency response is the way it is might be, well, because of those isodynamic drivers I keep talking about, specifically the shape. The Lyric are Meze's first closed-back isodynamic headphones, and for these, they partnered up with a company out of Ukraine, Renaro Isodynamics. They've also worked together on both the Empyrean and the Elite lines. Both of those are also isodynamic headphones, but they are both open-backed, which impacts the sound significantly. Open-back headphones sound more spacious and open, whereas closed-back headphones tend to sound more intimate and closed in. For the Lyric, what the companies tried to do was take the driver from the higher-end Empyrean and Elite lines and scale them down so that it was smaller and lighter than either of those. They also introduced something called the ear pad airflow system, which is meant to give these a better imaging overall than you'd normally get with a closed-back pair of headphones, plus a more natural sound by putting a bit of space between the magnetic driver and the headphones back so that the sound has space enough to bounce around a bit. This is supposed to create a more realistic feel to the sound, plus improve the overall imaging with the sound itself. The isodynamic drivers in here are separated into two portions. The switchback design on top actually handles the bass and lower frequencies, while the circular part of the bottom handles the middle and higher frequencies. The design on these is set up so that the circular part should be aimed more squarely at your actual ear while letting the bass bounce around the ear pads a bit. This helps guarantee the best sound out of these. So when you put them on, be sure to try to align them properly for best sound. While I thought that the timbre might be a little bit compromised at times, one thing that I loved was the detail. It's excellent with these. A good piece to experience this with is Wintertime by Asher Gamedzi. I'm never gonna get this right. From his Turbulence and Pulse record. The double bass comes out great. It's full, it's resonant, and it has enough detail that I can easily identify the plucking technique used when they were playing the instrument. Then you have the trumpet and sax combo, which is split between the left and the right channel, so you have this nice immersive but cozy feel to the piece. It's like you are not in a concert hall, you're in a studio with these musicians around you. When it came to directionality and spaciousness, the Lyric was decent, especially for closed-back headphones, but instruments still felt a bit more intimate than they would with open-back headphones like the 109 Pro, for example. Still, the imaging was very decent. Clarity was good enough to keep instruments pretty well separated and identifiable. So how does this ultimately impact music? Broadly speaking, and I'll deep dive into this, I really enjoyed listening to pop and hip hop with these. Folk, indie, jazz, and classic rock, I was on the fence about, but generally I liked it. Classical, on the other hand, and some alternative styles were not my favorites, although they did have highlights. Now, these EQ spectacularly well, and they're easy to drive, But like every planar I've ever used, they really benefit from some extra power. Not a ton is needed though. A simple Q-Delix 5K will do. Now let's deep dive into the different genres. Starting with hip hop. These are marvelous, and it was probably my favorite genre while using these. Listening to My Shot by The Roots from the Hamilton mixtape was incredible, and it's the same thing with Immigrants by Kanan. The whole album was great on these. The album Michael by Killer Mike was one of my favorites last year, and these just shine with it. Although I could have used a little bit more in that lower mid region in the song Down by the Law, just because I wanted a bit more of that CeeLo Green line. When it came to pop, indie, and alternative, these were mostly good, particularly when it had more electronic production elements and enhancements, like with Lana Del Rey's Born to Die. Maybe my favorite album to listen to with these. Another one I really loved was Lucrecia Dalt's I, which I think is a particularly excellent testing album for the lyric. For example, in track 3, Atemporal, this piece really brings out a lot of the aspects of this headphone that I found notable. There's definitely some good bass physicality and fullness here, and the complexity of the piece really highlights the response and detail on these. At the same time, the female vocals sometimes felt a little overpowered by this instrumentation. This is where I would have wanted just a bit more. Folk music also did well with these, but when I was listening to Tracy Chapman's Fast Car, I ran into some of the same issues with overpowered voices. I decided to do some EQ testing with this piece specifically, so I did an A/B test between the default frequency response and the Oratory 1990 EQ settings on my Q-Delix 5K. While the default sound was fine, the Oratory 1990 settings were much more satisfying. Electronic was also hit or miss for me. For example, Heptapod B by Johan Johansson from the soundtrack to the movie Arrival was good, but it could have been more fulfilling. That said, genres like lo-fi shine on this, and yes, I get the irony of using audiophile headphones for lo-fi. Metal and rock were both enjoyable with these, especially because of that low-end emphasis, although I would have wanted a bit more energy in the low mids to match that energy in the bass. If you're listening to something like Fathomless Rituals, Hymns to the Lesser Gods, then these are fantastic, although the upper registers get a bit too weak if the volume is on the lower side. On the other hand, something like Baby Metal really makes use of the fun aspects of the tuning on these, as well as the detail and resolution. But if anything, I think that rock and metal, more than any other genres except maybe classical, really benefit from giving these some extra power. Speaking of classical, which I've already touched on some, like other genres, it's hit or miss. For anything where the double bass is prominent, I loved these, especially the Dragonetti Concerto for double bass in A minor. But in pieces that focus more on the middle instruments like violins, violas, most woodwinds, the tuning on the lyric was such that these wouldn't be my first choice in those areas. So yeah, the sound on the Meze Liric is a fun sound, but it's one I really love for some genres and can take or leave for others depending on my mood. So all this said, here's the thing with the Lyric. They're unique. And whether you like these or not, I think very much depends on what you listen to. Some people I've talked to hated these. Others absolutely adored them. The Meze Liric are nothing if not polarizing. Mind you, I'll be transparent. I didn't like this one much at first, but then I liked it a lot. Quirks and all, maybe because of those quirks. But I don't know that I would recommend it to anyone without trying them first for an extended period because they take some getting used to. I know that these are $2,000, but I would not buy them by themselves. I'd want to complement them with something else, something either more neutral or something that brings different elements to the table. In fact, if you like Meze, I'd argue that a great complement for the Lyric is the 109 Pro because the two sound so different while still following the same overall philosophy of sound. Plus, one is magnetic and one is a dynamic driver, and you get the best of both worlds in that case. Check out my review on those right here. If you found this useful, remember to like, subscribe, and follow me on my socials, linked in the description below. And finally, a quick thanks to Meze for letting me borrow these for as long as I did. I am grateful that they did, and I think that this review is definitely better because of that extra time. Thanks for watching.